Our economic picture feels cloudy and uneven. When the portrait of our region gets painted, whether for locals or outsiders, it should be like a Monet, maybe messy or unclear when you're up close, but when you step back, it's clear and powerful as a picture. But right now, it doesn't feel that way.
Some interesting words right there from the 143rd meeting of the Seattle Metro Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago from outgoing president and CEO Rachel Smith. What does the economic picture of Seattle really look like? How could a ballot measure aimed at changing the city's business and occupation tax structure impact the city? And how are local employers reacting to tariffs, threats to shut down the World Cup in Seattle, and whatever's new this week from the Trump administration? Well, greetings all. It's a patrons first edition of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on the Seattle channel. The views expressed here are mine. And I'm with the very person you heard from just a few seconds ago. That would be Rachel Smith, the magic of the internet. We made this happen, the outgoing president and CEO of the Seattle Metro Chamber. Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It is my absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Rachel. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso, on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to the patrons of the show. Big shout out to Mike. Thank you for jumping on board as a $5 a month patron just a few days ago. If you want to be cool like Mike, you can even get your own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal, get access to these patrons first podcasts before anybody else, even ask questions that we'll answer on the show. Well, head to Patreon, check it out. Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Also, thanks for watching this podcast on Converge Media, the video version on Converge most Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get this party started. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Well, Rachel, you stepped in as president and CEO of the Seattle Metro Chamber in January of 2021, right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. And now you're stepping down as of September of this year to take on a new position with Washington Roundtable. Can we talk briefly about why you're leaving the chamber job, what your new role is all about?
Sure. And, I hadn't planned to leave the chamber. I love the organization. I think it's incredible. As you mentioned, it is a 143-year-old institution in this region. And I think having it there, having it be a strong voice for the employer community is really, really important. But I was there almost 5 years. And honestly, I think a new blood and a fresh perspective is always a good thing. If nothing else, it kind of keeps people guessing a little bit. And I would say the leadership at the roundtable is a persuasive bunch.
Okay.
So they reached out and encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring. And, Brian, you know me, I like a challenge.
Yeah.
I've been told before that my brand is maybe running into the burning building.
Okay. All right.
We have kind of a statewide, maybe keeping that metaphor going, economic fire is smoldering, maybe just a little bit. And I care deeply about the employer community and the economy here in the region. And this actually gives me a platform to take that commitment to really every corner of Washington state.
Right. Can you tell me a little bit about what Washington Roundtable is? It's a nonprofit. It represents a lot of businesses. What is the Roundtable?
Yeah, so the Roundtable is comprised of senior executives of major private sector employers in Washington state. Those members come together and work together to really affect positive change on public policy issues that they believe are the most important to supporting, sort of state economic vitality, fostering opportunity for all Washingtonians. You often see the roundtable showing up on issues like education, issues like transportation, and of course, economic competitiveness.
Got it. Well, let's talk about that economic competitiveness, because I think about the Metro Chamber. It's made up of about 2,500 member businesses from very small to very large. You've had your finger on the pulse of this business community for many, many years. When you said at your meeting a few weeks ago that our economic picture feels cloudy, feels uneven, what did you mean by that? What sort of economic indicators are you looking at that gives you that sense?
I've said before, as head of the chamber, that I'm maybe one of the region's cheerleaders and chiefs. And so I do have to kind of start with that. We have so many amazing things that are coming online in Seattle and the region. Obviously, the Mariners, which we are all so excited about.
Always,
but especially right now.
Yeah.
The waterfront, the Overlook Walk, the aquarium expansion, light rail making its way north, south, east, and deeper into Seattle, the convention center, World Cup coming in 2026. So we have so many wonderful assets And I think it's important to start every conversation with that, sort of still in that positive space. I think things are generally getting better on the quality of life front as well. Things like homelessness and public safety have improved. I think we can put a bookmark in affordability because I think that continues to be a real challenge. But I think we are seeing a lot of progress on some of those other quality of life issues. And, we've looked at the encampment reduction numbers, historic investments in affordable housing, hired new police officers, standing up the care team, all those things are really good and important. But, the business climate in Seattle, I think, is something that leaders should be paying attention to. Downtown Seattle vacancy rate is nearing 35%, Bellevue's at like 20. Seattle job growth is lagging. Our rate of adding jobs is lower than the national rate. Economists, I find I'm hearing them more and more reminding policymakers that businesses respond to incentives. Tax increases are not the only one, but they are one. When you look at, since 2019, Seattle has passed the payroll expense tax and increased it twice. They passed a sweet and beverage tax, a short-term rental tax, a transportation network company tax. Then there are the property tax levies, which businesses also pay. And then this year, of course, the sales tax for public safety and the B&O increase for certain businesses. It is, by any standard, I think, kind of a lot. I think we need to look at whether that's also good tax policy. At the chamber, we kind of affectionately have had something that we call the Seattle cycle, where it's sort of like we're raising taxes, which may result in fewer jobs, which then concentrates the tax base, which then makes revenues more volatile. So then you need to raise more taxes, right? It's sometimes be a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I'm not saying we're all the way there yet, but it's something for policymakers to be thinking about.
Yeah.
And then I'll just maybe sort of end by saying, I think in bigger picture, sort of leading into my new role, Washington was recently ranked by Forbes as one of the worst places to start a business. And today, nearly 60% of Washington businesses fail in their first 5 years, which is one of either one of the highest rates in the country. So I am no Chicken Little here. I'm not saying the sky is falling, but I think any policymaker should be looking at those signals and taking them seriously and starting to plan and think about what they want to do about that.
I hear what you're saying, and I thought it was very interesting during your meeting. Teresa Hudson for Microsoft, incoming chair of the Seattle Metro Chamber, she said our region has a hard task ahead to reset the conversation about how healthy business, healthy employers are one of the core parts of our community here. And you mentioned this. We've seen it over the past couple of years, these different taxes for businesses. But I got to say, Seattle and the state of Washington seem like they can't get enough of it. Capital gains tax, voters love it. Payroll expense tax on big businesses, Seattle's all about it. And I think there's just this narrative of, hey, we don't have an income tax in this state. Washington's tax system is very regressive. We need to get tax revenue from our bigger businesses. How do you reset that conversation, reset that narrative? Because I think voters have a certain way they're looking at that right now.
I mean, that's a really big question. And there's a lot of things, I think, to unpack there. But maybe I'll kind of say this. For many of us, and I put myself in this category, we've been sort of caught up, I think, in debating whose explanations for what is happening are true. But I will say a couple of things that absolutely are true. It is true that the concentration of wealth in this country and the emerging and significant wealth gap in our country is real, right? It's true that the behavior of, people like Elon Musk, when it comes with what he did with Doge and the federal government, that was reckless and it was frankly ineffectual.
Yeah.
It is true that voters are in the space that you just mentioned in terms of thinking about, sort of that tax the rich sentiment, the pay what they owe, and we've all seen that certain policymakers have sort of villainized a little bit the business community. But then I think we kind of get into the disagreement here. So there's kind of a, if you will, a crowd over here who kind of has a hands-off reasoning for any of our failures to deliver, like crime, it's just national trends, job loss, it's just AI, downtown vacancies, just remote work. For other things, it's just that we don't have enough money for education, affordable housing, childcare. And then I think there's kind of a crowd here sort of saying, taxes and regulation are making things, less affordable. They're contributing to the lack of affordability. Businesses are moving jobs. We're spending more money and not getting the results that we want. And I'm just kind of getting to a place a little bit where I'm like, okay, for argument's sake, let's just accept maybe crowd one's arguments. I don't accept them all, but for argument's sake, let's do. So the real question is, what is the plan then? It seems like every angle is getting consideration except kind of the angle of jobs and the economy. by focusing our energy on the debate of whose explanations are correct, we're kind of giving everyone a pass on answering the real question, which is it our actual position that the accidental economy that we have here will just kind of continue to be accidentally awesome no matter what? Or do we need to actually make a plan to make sure that we grow jobs here, that we have a strong economy? I previewed this at one of our chamber events the other day, and it will be coming out with the index, which is, the chamber's public opinion research. But
right.
I think you're going to see that the voters are also starting to be in a place where they are maybe actually ahead of the policymakers in recognizing what is happening with the local and national economic realities. And I've actually seen some statewide polling that is suggesting that is true statewide as well.
Interesting. Wow. A lot to pull apart there still, but I really wanted to make sure I moved on to a new topic with Rachel here, because the city of Seattle has been talking a lot about Trump-proofing the city, but what impact is resisting the policies of Donald Trump really having on Seattle's business community? Some points to ponder coming up next on Now Hear This. Well, plenty of headlines here in October about the possibilities of a federalized National Guard coming to Portland or Seattle. Our state and local leaders have been speaking out about this with a message of resistance, but the message from the White House is clear, as President Trump said just a few months ago when he announced troops were going into Washington, D.C. If you're a so-called sanctuary city like Seattle, you're on his list of targets.
But they turned our nation's capital into a sanctuary jurisdiction. That's the other thing. We have to get rid of sanctuary cities as quickly as possible. We're going to do it, too. We have to.
Rachel, another big question for you here, but how do you see business leaders in Seattle responding to the Trump administration? Is this a president that is bad for business? How do you look at that?
Yeah, I would start by saying I think the very best resistance to Trump or to anything that would seek to undermine us here in the Puget Sound region is having a strong and safe and sympathetic and stable and successful Seattle. That is actually the best way to resist.
Okay.
When our community is strong, when our economy is strong, when we are taking care of our people here, that is the best resistance that we could possibly have. And yes, I think we absolutely need to resist federal overreach. We need to resist illegal acts, no matter what leader they come from. We need to resist policy changes that hurt people and not lift them up. I'm very proud of our leaders like Attorney General Nick Brown, Governor Ferguson, Mayor Harrell, and how they are protecting us legally and protecting our communities. So absolutely, we need to do that. What I don't think is helpful is doing things locally that actually might undermine that notion of a safe and successful Seattle in the name of resisting Trump. So I think
you might be talking about the Seattle Shield measure here. Is that where you're going? Or?
Well, maybe not specifically, but I think just generally making it more expensive to employ someone in Seattle versus Bellevue or Vancouver, BC, that doesn't punish Mark Zuckerberg. Making it harder to open or grow a business in Seattle doesn't stick it to Elon Musk.
Okay.
As we think about what is resistance, it has to be in service to making our community stronger and safer and better. That is where we should be resisting. And obviously, in a trade dependent state like Washington, tariffs and some of these big economic moves, it is piling on. And so we've got to think about what is happening with those big economic moves at the federal level. And then what are we doing here locally? Because to a business, they're getting it all.
I do have to make sure I ask you about this piece, though. I look at, I'm sure you see them too, the financial reports coming in from Amazon. Hey, the Q4 profit from last year's $20 billion. It's up 88% from the year before, things like that. I've seen those numbers. I know you have too. And I think the average person sees that and says, wait a minute, there's all this talk about, moving jobs and these sort of things. But then we're also talking about record profits there. How do you balance those two things, Rachel? How do you look at those numbers?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? I'm not going to pretend that it's not. And, I sort of started my remarks here by saying lots of things can be true at once. It can be true that we are having that real wealth gap and that is a problem. But I think you have to think about what are you trying to solve, and is the tool that you're using the right solve for that thing? So yes, you can look at a company and look at their profits, but you might not know that they are also investing billions of more dollars into a new product or a new innovation or research and development and things like that. You may not know all of that. And going back to sort of the tool for the job thing, making a job more expensive in Seattle versus Bellevue, I don't know what we're solving for there, but it's not going to solve our overall wealth gap, right? Like that is just making a job more expensive. And I don't believe that businesses make decisions based on a single thing. I think this notion that, oh, that was the straw that broke the camel's back is typically not true.
Okay.
But what they are doing, and I think they are doing this constantly, is assessing whether or not they can be successful in the environment that they are in, right?
Yeah.
And that has to do with customers, it has to do with operating costs, it has to do with talent, and it has to do with the tax and regulatory environment. And so we have to keep in mind that there are a number of inputs into a business's decision and be mindful of all of those kind of as we're making our policy decisions.
Thank you. I wanted to move along and touch on a couple issues you just brought up here, really central to your work at the Chamber over the past couple of years. Public safety, homelessness. Just starting with public safety here, police hiring starting to climb up in Seattle over the past year. There's also a larger discussion going on about providing more 911 alternative response on our streets, CARE, the community-assisted response and engagement there, handling the person down calls, etc. How have you seen this public safety issue change over your past 4+ years as chamber president?
I think things are getting better. I mean, you just named it, bringing on, significant new SPD recruits, standing up the CARE team, bringing an amazing leader into that group, 80% decrease in tent encampments. All of those things, I think, are indications of positive progress. And again, going back to the index, while the numbers didn't change that much in terms of what's going to be released next week, over the course of the last few years, voters have been consistently saying that those things are getting better. And I really agree with that. I think back to put yourself in December of 2020, which was right before I started at the chamber, pretty night and day when you look at, what's been happening there. And I know that these continue to be top issues for voters. And so we hear candidates talking about them. We hear policymakers continuing to talk about them. And obviously people on kind of different sides of the issue are always looking for ways to distinguish themselves. And these issues can be a way to do that, particularly in the candidate space. There is pressure from some different parts of our community to, let's say, repeal the stay out orders or stop doing encampment cleanups. I would just say that I think if policymakers were to do some of those things, they better have a plan to put other things in place pretty quickly, because I don't think the voters are going to give much runway and public safety or homelessness gets worse. They do not want to go backwards. They want to continue to go forward on those issues and want to see them continuing to get better. We're also seeing in the index kind of this real back to basics notion coming from the voters. Now, that is in no way to suggest that the candidates shouldn't talk about resisting Trump and things like that. Absolutely, sure. They should, because that is very important. But I think this, kind of bringing what I said earlier to the fore here, if voters are feeling some economic concern, fear of a recession, fear of their own personal financial situation, they are fearful of what might be happening coming from the Trump administration. I think that is driving some of that back to basics. And I don't think they're going to want to see us lose any ground on public safety and homelessness.
I hear you. And I did want to touch on homelessness a little more specifically here. You've watched over your time the establishment of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, meant to work on this issue from a larger regional level there. But still, we have the number of unhoused people in our region continuing to rise. Most recent counts pegs that number at about 17,000. Have you seen Seattle really move the needle on homelessness over the past 4 years as you've been at the chamber there? I wanted to talk about this because while I'm seeing, maybe fewer tents on the street in the downtown core, I don't think the numbers are dropping in a significant way. And I wanted your touch on that.
And I'm in a luxurious position of having been in government for nearly 15 years.
Right.
Not in it now, so I can be both. I both understand how complicated it is, and I can deeply empathize with that. And I've been there, so sometimes when you're telling me something's not possible, I'm not really buying it because I have been there. And I would say that and this is a more general statement than homelessness specifically, but I think we need to do more faster. And I know it's hard, but we let so many things get in the way of getting it done. I had the chance to hear Mark Dunkelman, author of Why Nothing Works, speak yesterday, and I had a really long and great conversation with him. And of course, everybody's read Abundance, and they're generally right about the barriers that we accept the ideological purity that we demand,
Yeah.
the complacency that we fall into. And I think we just have to be better and stronger than that. And I would also say, importantly, I want to distinguish that from like sort of pie in the sky wishful thinking. It is equally disingenuous to promise people unrealistic solutions to complex problems and treat those solutions as if they're real easy or they have no consequences. I don't agree with that. But to do big things, we have to work in coalition. We have to remove those barriers. And we have to keep our shoulder in and do the hard work. And I think nothing speaks more to the barriers we accept, the ideological purity we demand, and the complacency we fall into than homelessness.
This is a conversation I know we're going to have in the future, Rachel. So I appreciate you breaking all those issues down. But I did want to talk about something coming up. A look ahead toward the future of Seattle business, the future of the Chamber, and so much more. Plenty to talk about with special guest Rachel Smith coming up on What's Next. Rachel, you have worked on a ton of projects during your 4+ years at the Seattle Metro Chamber. You launched the Index, which we've talked about before, which polls voters regularly on local issues. You helped push through a state transportation measure in 2022, Move Ahead Washington, a near $17 billion funding plan there. Is one of those the accomplishment you're most proud of when you look back on your years at the Chamber? What are you thinking about?
Well, first of all, I'm thinking about the Chamber staff and how amazing they all are. I think it'll all be revealed now that I'm leaving that they've really been behind all this great work.
Okay, all right.
So I want to just give them huge kudos for their amazing work, and also the Chamber board. I mean, we have the best employer community in the entire world. I say it to them all the time. It is an absolute delight to have the opportunity to learn with these amazing board members, to understand the great things we're doing. And, as a reminder, the Chamber really is employers. We're not just businesses. So yes, we have small business, large business. We also have nonprofit organizations. It's just this incredible group of leaders and civic leaders who are working to shape both the Chamber and our community. So kudos to both the Chamber staff and the board. I am proud of the Index, and proud of, I think, how we as an organization have sort of navigated what is often a really tough political environment to really be able to make gains and successes. I'm really proud of how we helped our community navigate out of the pandemic, including after I started the Seattle Metro Chamber. You remember when we did vaccine verification, when that was a thing, and the Chamber actually ran a county's business outreach for vaccine verification. And that was, we called it Vax Verify, and it was a really successful program and one that I'm proud of. I'm proud of launching our Community Business Connector program, which helps small and BIPOC-owned businesses, and actually leveraging that into having the local organizing committee for the World Cup name the Chamber as the official business support liaison. So that is very cool. I'm proud of some partnerships that are maybe in their infancy, but that are going to go into the future with the Chamber. So working with the Bellevue Chamber on housing and creating a real formal partnership there. And then with Downtown Seattle Association on a million things, but most recently on sound transit and how we're going to be bringing light rail through downtown. I, worked on a lot of ballot measures, both in my career and at the Chamber, but one that I'm especially proud of is the No on 2117 campaign. And, the business community was not 100% aligned on that position, but the Chamber full-throatedly endorsed the no side to keep the Climate Commitment Act in place. I kind of fought like hell on that campaign, and I like to think that I'm maybe partly responsible for bringing home the Seattle Times endorsement for that. We talked about some of the external stuff, public safety and homelessness.
Yeah.
But also we did a lot of internal things to the Chamber, like working on our culture, employee engagement, enhancing our communications work. I'm incredibly proud of the organization and everything that we've accomplished together in the next 5 years, and know that the road is wide open for them going into the future.
I was going to say, what's that unfinished business in your mind? I'm trying to look towards the future here and where the Chamber's going, where our Seattle economy's going, et cetera. Is there a part where you're saying to yourself, shoot, I wish I could have accomplished that piece? Or maybe you say that every day. I know you're
I do. I say that every day. Yes. There's always more work to do, And, I think it's kind of about two things. I mean, one, I think it's having the long-term foundational pieces like the Index, like some of those things, because part part of this is just keeping your finger on the pulse all the time, right? And understanding what's going on in the community and how is affecting the business community and the community more broadly. What should our positions be on those things? How can we help? How can we solve this problem? That's just the day-to-day work that the chamber will be doing all the time. I do think, though, this economic and affordability piece is where all the conversations are going to be in the coming years. And I think that is not unique to Seattle or the region. I think that is going to be statewide as well.
Yeah.
We can't make things more affordable by making them more expensive.
Okay.
And we have had this accidentally awesome economy. As I said before, we need to actually make a plan to determine what kind of jobs and industries we want to grow here. I really do think that kind of focus on the economy and affordability for businesses and individuals is going to be the thing we all need to work a lot on in the next couple of years.
And how, I guess, just to wrap up, how do you want to shape that? What do you want to add to that conversation? How do you want to guide that? Because you're right, affordability, so many of the candidates are talking about it this time around in Seattle and really nationwide. How does the business community impact that? What's the voice there?
There's, I guess, maybe a couple of different ways to think about that. One, I think, is really bringing together a lot of the business community organizations to work more collaboratively and to make sure that we have a really clear vision on behalf of our members. We kind of started that last year with Washington Roundtable under Steve Mullen's leadership. Prior, the Seattle Metro Chamber, the Bellevue Chamber, Association of Washington Businesses, occasionally the Tacoma and Pierce County Chamber started really kind of coming together. And I want to continue to do that in my new role. When we talk about the issues, most people know what's going on with homelessness. They know the numbers. They know that we need, 300,000 new homes in King County because of our dearth of housing. They know that we had, the lowest number of officers since the 70s. Like, they know a lot of that information just naturally. They don't know how many jobs we need to grow in King County in the next 20 years. They don't know how many jobs are going to require a 4-year degree. They don't know how many plumbers and pipe fitters, and trades jobs we need. And that needs to come into our collective conversation in a much more meaningful way. And then when it does, then we can start to actually figure out, what does that look like? I mean, yes, we need taxes because we need government to do the thing that government does, which is serve the people. But at some point, you start to actually have it backwards. If your tax and regulatory environment is actually decreasing the number of businesses and jobs, you're going to have less revenue, right? So we can actually solve a lot of problems by making it easier to start a business and have more jobs here. We have more jobs for people, good paying jobs. We have more money for government, and people can take care of their families and give back to their community. Like, good jobs used to be a thing we talked a lot about, and we kind of lost that. And I think we need to get it back. And, so affordability, economic development, I really want to be part of the moving that narrative into our bigger collective narrative. And then, of course, we'll do all the other things that we do at advocacy organizations as well. We'll lobby and educate the public and, talk to the media and work to bring accountability to the positions our lawmakers take and work to be problem solvers just right alongside them. And if you'll indulge me, maybe I'll just say one more thing.
Yeah.
Washington State is exceptional. It is such an exceptional place, from our natural beauty and our recreational opportunities to our research and innovation to our business community. We are leaders in aerospace and agriculture and tech and life sciences. We've homegrown some of the most pioneering and successful companies in the world. And those large employers are complemented by small businesses and nonprofits who make this state vibrant. It's what helps us attract employees, and all of that together makes the different places in Washington State like places people actually want to be. But I feel like in some ways our partners in government maybe are not quite keeping up. It kind of feels like, spending is up, results are down. We kind of lack this vision for maintaining and growing a strong and diverse economy. That kind of on top of some of these tax increases and this just sort of increasingly challenging environment and what's happening at the federal level, that's what's driving affordability challenges for people across the state. And I feel like all of it kind of risks dulling that exceptionalism that we have. And I don't want to see that. And I want to be a part of solving that.
Well, I know you're going to be part of that solution at some point, Rachel. I so appreciate you joining me. That's Rachel Smith, outgoing president and CEO of the Seattle Metro Chamber, and the new president of Washington Roundtable. Rachel, thanks a lot for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for everything you do, Brian.
I appreciate you saying that. Thanks to everybody listening to this special Patrons First podcast of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics and the economy, too. Patrons, this one's for you. If you want to be a patron, get in on the fun, please. Pledge $5 per month or more on Patreon to Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Thank you for your support. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.